They arrived at sunrise on a chilly October morning, the sky a smoky veil of pre-dawn clouds that hinted at rain. Four buses carrying families from the conflict-racked provinces of Kaloran rolled into the small town of Riverton, depositing their passengers at the edge of the old industrial district. Miriam stepped off the bus clutching her younger brother Rifat's hand, while her mother, Amal, held little Sana in her arms. Their father, Azim, had died months earlier while fighting to defend their home, and now they were beginning a new exile in a place that felt as foreign as the moon. Miriam felt the weight of every suitcase in her other hand, her own small duffel bag, woven blankets draped over her shoulder, and the fluttering envelope of official papers that designated her family as refugee entrants. As they approached the bus station, a group of teenagers wearing denim jackets painted with the words, "Stop the Invasion," slouched near a chain-link fence. One of them spat on the ground as Miriam's mother passed, and a shallow voice hissed, "You don't belong here." It cut through Miriam's chest like a knife, but she forced herself to keep walking, kneeling to help her brother step over a curb. Inside the bus station, a volunteer wearing a bright green vest handed each family a small white packet containing a town map, a list of local community resources, and two folded blankets. "Welcome to Riverton," the volunteer said, voice warm but clearly practiced. Miriam looked up at her uncertainly. The volunteer smiled and motioned for her and her family to move toward a low-slung community center across the street. A banner hung above the door. "Welcome, newcomers." But underneath it, someone had tacked a scrawled sign on cardboard that read, "They have no place here." The volunteers had tried to cover it with tape, but the scrawled words were still visible, like a wound refusing to heal. Miriam squeezed her mother's hand. Amal forced herself to smile, smoothing the folds of her headscarf, and led the children inside. Over the next few days, Miriam learned that the town of Riverton was no stranger to newcomers. Another group of refugees had arrived 5 years earlier after the Great Flood destroyed their homes, and the Yomani families brought in then had mostly integrated into local life. Yet the arrival of her own family sparked a heated undercurrent of resentment. A hastily called town hall meeting in the high school auditorium filled the chairs with restless townspeople. Factory workers who said the newcomers would take their jobs, small business owners who worried their tax dollars would pay for extra, services parents who feared for their children's safety. One elderly man, face lined by decades of cold winters, stood to declare, "They don't know our way of life. They'll corrupt it." Another woman said, "We can help a few families, but not hundreds. We can't afford it." When someone shouted, "Send them back where they came from," Miriam's stomach knotted and she gripped her mother's sleeve so hard her nails dug into the cloth. Amal knelt beside her, whispering gently in Arabic, "We have come here to be safe. We will be safe if we stand together." As they filed out, a group of teenagers jostled Miriam's brother, calling him foreigner and illegal. Miriam raised her hand to shove one of them, but lost her nerve and fled with Rifayat and Sana to the bus. Stopped, wondering how she would find courage in a place where everything she had known, her language, her food, her clothes, marked her as different. The first week passed in a daze. They stayed at a cramped room in Aunt Regina's house several blocks off Main Street. Regina, married to a local mechanic named Devon, had volunteered to sponsor Miriam's family. The house was modest, 2 bedrooms, a narrow living room, a tiny kitchen, but for Miriam it felt as unfamiliar as a dreamscape. The wallpaper in the living room was a dusty rose patterned with tiny flowers. The carpet smelled of years of cigarette smoke and pine-scented cleaner. Regina tried to make them comfortable, offering kitchen shelves filled with mismatched dishes and sliding an inflatable mattress into one corner for Rifat and Sana. But every time Miriam tried to sleep, she heard the drones of cars on the highway and imagined the angry voices from the town hall meeting pounding in her ears. At night, she tiptoed to the window and watched as lights flickered on in nearby houses, and she trembled knowing that behind some of those windows, people believed her family had no place here. School started for Rifat that Monday. He wore a second-hand jacket too big for his thin frame and clutched a worn backpack. Miriam walked him down the leaf-flecked sidewalk to Riverton Elementary, pausing at a poster taped to the glass front door. "Welcome, students," but graffitied beneath it, in black marker, someone had written, "Not you." Rifayat's face twisted in shame when he saw it, and Mariam looped her arm around his narrow shoulders, saying softly, "Don't pay attention. Just go inside." Little kids whispered as he passed. One girl pointed at his headscarf and laughed. He straightened his shoulders and kept walking, but he glanced back twice, tears brimming in his eyes. Miriam watched through the window until he was inside. then walked away before she could cry herself. That afternoon, Miriam returned to the community center, where a group of volunteers taught English lessons. She felt awkward among the rows of tables, paper cups strewn on the edges, flickering fluorescent lights overhead. The teacher, Ms. Jacobs, an energetic librarian in her mid-40s, explained, "Today we'll practice introductions. My name is... I am from... I like," Miriam wrote in her notebook. "My name is Miriam." When she said the words out loud, her voice wavered. Another woman, an older refugee from the first wave named Hala, patted Miriam's hand and said kindly, "Keep speaking. They need to hear your voice." But Miriam could only manage a whisper. Afterward, as the students filed out, a tall teenage boy with braces walked up. "You speak funny," he said mockingly. Miriam squeezed her fists. "Excuse me?" she said, trembling. "I've never seen someone wear a scarf in school," he continued, pointing at her hijab. "We're not in your country now." Something inside her snapped. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but hesitated, and the boy shrugged and walked away, leaving Miriam with her cheeks burning. That night, Amal suggested they try one small comfort: cooking. She gathered potatoes, onions, and a spice packet Regina had found at a local market, and they prepared a pot of harira, hearty soup with lentils, chickpeas, tomatoes, and lamb. As the fragrant steam rose, Amal told stories of the old home, of streets lined with palm trees and bustling markets where she and Azim had courted. Rifat and little Sana sat cross-legged on the floor, leaning over their bowls. For a moment, the oppressive walls of exiled fear lifted, replaced by the warmth of family and the scent of home. Miriam dipped a piece of bread into the rich broth and felt something stir within her. The realization that they still had culture, still had roots, still had each other. Over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Evans, a local pediatrician, arrived at the community center to offer free health screenings. Miriam's mother accompanied Hala's mother, while Miriam volunteered to play with the children in the corner. She sat with Rifat at a small plastic table and drew pictures of mosques and minarets, of snowscapes from the mountains they had left behind, of the sun setting behind their old village. The other children watched curiously, then called to their mothers for crayons and paper. Before long, a circle of toddler scribbles and giggles grew around Miriam as she translated for the little ones who spoke no English. At that moment, she glimpsed an unexpected bridge of connection: art, laughter, shared crayons. It gave her hope that perhaps one day the barrier between them and the townsfolk could be crossed. At the same time, a handful of local college students formed Riverton United, a grassroots group dedicated to supporting refugees. They posted flyers around town: "Peace March for Welcome and Unity," the date and time scrawled beneath. Miriam had heard about it from her Arabic tutor, Yusuf, a sophomore at Riverton University, who also volunteered as a translator at the community center. "They need voices like yours," he told her. "If you speak, people will listen." Miriam felt fear prickling at her scalp. The memory of the town hall meeting haunted her: the chants, the boos, the hostile stares. But something in Yusuf's gentle insistence awakened her own quiet courage. She took a flyer and slipped it into her pocket, wondering if she could join the march. The night before the march, Miriam lay awake listening to the wind rattle the window panes. Amal slept fitfully in the bed across the room, and Rifat and Sana snored softly in the next room. Miriam thought of the signs that said "they have no place here," etched into her mind like barbed wire. But she also recalled the looks of gratitude on the faces of the few neighbors who had offered help, the warmth in Dr. Evans's eyes when he praised her mother's bravery, the way the community center volunteers clapped when she read a children's story in English and Arabic. She realized she could no longer let fear keep her family silent. She had to stand up and speak for them, to push back against the hate that threatened to swallow their small hopes. By dawn, she had made her decision. On the day of the march, the sky was overcast, but not yet raining. Miriam and Amal dressed carefully. Miriam in a long dark coat over a flowery dress and a rust-colored headscarf pinned beneath her chin. Amal in a deep blue abaya and a patterned hijab. Rifat, age 8, wore a school uniform borrowed from his friend Omar, and little Sana, age 3, wore a pink sweater with hearts stitched into the fabric. They linked arms as they walked down the quiet side street toward City Park, where a crowd of about 200 people had gathered. Some wore hoodies with Riverton United printed on the back. Others held bright handmade signs: "Welcome home, not foreigners. Refugees are people too." Miriam's heart pounded as they approached. On a makeshift stage next to a stone gazebo, Lydia, one of the college organizers, held a megaphone. She spotted Miriam and waved her forward. Aziz, another volunteer with a camera, roamed among the crowd, filming supporters wearing scarves of solidarity. The moment felt surreal. Yusuf handed the megaphone to Amal, whose dark eyes flicked across the audience, some of whom had been at the town hall meeting 2 weeks earlier. Their arms crossed, eyebrows knit with skepticism. Amal took a deep breath and spoke in clear English. "My name is Amal Hassan. I come from a land torn by war. My husband died protecting our home. All I want now is to keep my children safe. Thank you to those of you who welcomed us. And to those who say we have no place here, I say, we have a place here the same way your ancestors sought refuge once. Protecting families is not a crime." A hush fell over the crowd. A few people turned away, but others looked at her with softened expressions. She handed the megaphone to Miriam. Miriam's mouth felt dry. She stepped forward onto the gravel path and raised the megaphone. "My name is Miriam Hassan. I am 16 years old. My brother and sister are here with me. We left our home because it was no longer safe. We came to Riverton because someone said we would be safe here. But many of you have said we do not belong." Those words hurt like stones thrown at our windows. But I believe we can be more than the words you say. We can be neighbors. We can go to school with your children. We can work alongside you. We can share our food, our stories, our hopes. Haven't we all seen what happens when we turn our backs on someone in need? That someone might be you one day. Please stand with us, not against us. Her voice wavered but grew steadier as she spoke. When she finished, a ripple of applause ran through the crowd, some cheers rising above the low hum, as if the breeze had carried her courage across the street. At precisely 4 p.m., the crowd began to march. They stepped off from the park, weaving through Maple Avenue, past the bakery where sweet smells of fresh bread drifted through the window, past the hardware store where tools lined the walls like silent sentinels. Drivers slowed their cars and rolled down windows to listen. One man in a pickup truck honked in support, and a few shouted thumbs up from the sidewalk. Miriam's family walked at the front of the procession, Rifa'at clinging to her hand and Sana tucked safely beneath her mother's arm. As they passed the boarded-up storefront that once housed a textile factory, where decades earlier another wave of immigrants had worked, Miriam felt a sense of continuity. This very neighborhood had known change before. It could know compassion now. Passers-by waved homemade signs aloft. "You are welcome here. Bridges, not walls. Home is where you are loved." On the corner of 5th and Elm, a cluster of teenagers wearing denim jackets turned to face the marchers. Some held signs of their own. "Riverton bleeds blue" and "Refugees go home." One of them, head lowered under a hood, spat on the pavement. Miriam's first impulse was to shout at them, but she steadied herself, recalling her mother's words about compassion. Instead, she locked eyes with the boy and said gently, "This is my home too." The boy hesitated, then turned away. Others in his group looked unsure. One dropped his sign onto the curb and walked off. Miriam breathed deeply and resumed marching, keeping her gaze forward. The march wound down East Main Street and turned onto City Hall Plaza. By the time they arrived, the crowd had grown to almost 500. Families, students, clergy members wearing collars, parents pushing strollers, older people with walkers. They gathered on the wet pavement as the college band played "Lean on Me." Children joined hands and swayed. Parents smiled bravely in the drizzle. The mayor of Riverton, a middle-aged man named Collins, appeared on the steps of City Hall, his expression unreadable. He raised his hand to quiet the crowd, and when the band ended, a hush settled once more. Mayor Collins cleared his throat. "I must admit, I did not expect to see so many of you here today. I've listened to your concerns, some of them sincere, some of them fearful, some of them angry. But today, I see Riverton at its best. People standing together, families supporting each other, neighbors extending their hands instead of closing their doors." There was a pause, as though he was choosing each word carefully. "To those of you who arrived here seeking refuge, I extend my apologies for any hostility you have faced. We can be better, and I commit to making Riverton a place where everyone has a chance to build a new life." A cheer rose in the crowd. Miriam heard her mother gasp and felt Rifat squeeze her hand. The mayor continued, "Effective immediately, I'm forming a task force to integrate our new residents, providing language classes, job training, and ensuring that public services are available to all. Let us move forward together, as Rivertonians in name and in spirit. The crowd erupted, and the college students hoisted the mayor onto their shoulders for a brief standing ovation. Miriam felt tears as she watched a woman in a wheelchair raise her fist, chanting, "Welcome home! Welcome home!" The rain had slowed to a mist, and the lights around City Hall glowed like beacons of hope. Later that evening, Miriam's family returned to Aunt Regina's house, where a small reception awaited. Neighbors brought bowls of chili, tins of bread, and a cake decorated with icing in the shape of a rainbow. Some had never spoken to Miriam's family before, but that night they offered hugs and words of welcome. A woman named Linda from down the street handed Sana a balloon and said softly, "I'm so sorry for the way my brother spoke to Rifat. He didn't understand. I hope he will soon." Miriam watched her mother embrace the woman, realizing that hearts could change. Across the living room, Rifat played cards with a boy who had teased him at school just days before, while Sana danced in circles chanting refugee in the broken English she had learned. Miriam stood by the window watching the winter dusk settle over the houses, porches glowing with warm lights, and felt something she had not felt since fleeing her homeland, a sense of possibility. Riverton was no longer a place of fear. It was a place where they had proved their worth simply by showing up, by standing up for themselves, and by reminding their neighbors that compassion is stronger than fear. In the weeks that followed, the impact of the march rippled through Riverton. The new task force held monthly meetings at City Hall, inviting residents to propose ways to support the families. Volunteer mentors, after-school tutoring, refurbished bicycles for children. The local high school created a Cultural Heritage Week, featuring art projects and performances, highlighting the newcomers' traditions. Employers began to hire parents for full-time jobs. In factories and shops, local nurses volunteered at free clinics. Landlords opened apartments to families for reasonable rent. Miriam enrolled at Riverton High School in midterms, nervous about her first day. She walked past the same bulletin board where "They have no place here" had been scrawled in marker. Now the board was covered in event flyers, English classes, holiday potlucks, community theater auditions, and directly over the old words, someone had taped a new sign: "You are a valued part of our community." Miriam took a breath, her heart pounding. When she stepped into the crowded hallway, classmates greeted her with nods. Some even asked, "How was your family at the rally?" Or, "Can you help me with my Arabic project?" In her first class, a boy named Tom sat next to her and introduced himself. "Hey, I'm Tom. Are you new? My mom said you and your family helped inspire the town. That's pretty cool." Miriam's mouth curved into a shy smile. "Thanks," she said softly. "I'm Miriam." Later, as winter snow fell, blanketing Riverton's rooftops in white, Miriam sat in the new library's study room with Rifat and Amal, working on their English reading assignments. Rifat had made a friend, Luis, whose family had lived in Riverton for generations, and they practiced multiplication tables together. Sana, now enrolled in preschool, recited English nursery rhymes to her mother in between sips of warm milk. Instructions posted on the wall read, "English as a second language class, Thursdays at 5 p.m. The task force bulletin board displayed upcoming volunteer opportunities: tutors needed, cultural potluck, job fair. When Miriam closed her notebook, she noticed her name on the composite poster for Cultural Heritage Week. Under presenters, it read, "Hassan Family, Cooking and Storytelling, Sunday, December 10th. She squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, they want us to teach about our culture. They actually want us." Amal's eyes glistened with tears as she hugged her daughter. At that moment, Miriam felt a surge of gratitude for the journey they had undertaken. From the buses at dawn to the banners on City Hall, from the harsh sign declaring they had no place to the warm invitations flooding the town. She thought of her father smiling at her in memory, proud that they had found strength to start anew. She looked at her mother and brother, and her hands tightened around theirs. She knew that Riverton would never be perfect. Prejudice and suspicion still lurked in whispers behind closed doors, but they had changed its course. They had shown that love and courage could transform hearts, block by block, chant by chant, march by march. As she watched snowflakes drift against the library window, she whispered, "We belong here." And in that small, sacred moment, she knew that her family had turned a sign of hate into a beacon of hope for all to see.